My sister grabbed her husband's arm the moment I walked through the doors. That's the clearest thing I remember. Her fingers went white around his sleeve, and the sound that came out of her mouth wasn't quite a word. It was something smaller than that. Something that had been waiting a long time to escape. My mother turned next. She was holding a tissue already, the way she always did at formal events, and when her eyes found my face, her hand dropped to her lap like she'd forgotten how to hold things. My father didn't move at all. He just stared. The white coat hung past my hips. The badge on my chest read attending physician, and below that my full name, and below that a title that had taken 11 years to earn. I hadn't seen my family in most of those years, and in the space of about 4 seconds, standing in the entrance of a hospital auditorium, everything my sister had told them about me had quietly come apart. But to understand how we ended up in that room, you have to go back to a town in eastern Tennessee. A town where people knew your business before you did, and where the worst thing you could be was someone who thought too highly of themselves. I grew up in Clarksville, not the Clarksville people picture when they hear Tennessee. Not Nashville's suburbs or anything with a skyline. This was the version with one main road, a diner that served the same pie for 40 years, and a high school where half the senior class had parents who also went to that high school. It was the kind of place that held on to people, sometimes gently, and sometimes not. My father, Robert Calloway, ran a small engine repair shop on the edge of town. He woke up before sunrise every day and came home smelling like grease and metal, and he never once complained about it. My mother, Patrice, worked the front desk at a dental office and organized the church fundraiser every spring without being asked. They were steady people, proud people, the kind who believed that hard work meant something and that family meant everything. My sister Dana was 4 years older than me. She had my mother's dark hair and my father's confidence, and from the time she was about 14, she had a way of filling up a room that I never quite figured out. Teachers remembered her name. Boys wanted her attention. She ran the student council her junior year, and nobody thought to question it. She just seemed like the kind of person things were supposed to go well for. I was quieter, not unhappy exactly, just more internal about it. I liked the library. I liked the biology section specifically. I used to check out the same anatomy textbook over and over because the school wouldn't let students keep it over the summer, and I'd sit on the back porch and copy out the diagrams by hand into a spiral notebook. My mother thought it was a phase. My father thought it was admirable but maybe impractical. Dana thought it was strange. By the time I was 17, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. Not in an abstract I'd like to help people way, but specifically, I wanted to be a surgeon. I had read enough to understand what that meant. The years of training, the debt, the competition. I understood it, and I wanted it anyway. When I told my parents at the kitchen table one September evening, my father set his fork down and looked at me for a long moment. "That's a long road," he said. "I know," I said. He picked his fork back up. "Then you'd better get started." My mother smiled and reached over and squeezed my hand. Dana was sitting across from me. She didn't say anything, but I noticed the way her jaw shifted slightly, the way she looked back at her plate a little too quickly. I got a scholarship to the University of Tennessee. Not a full ride, but enough to make it manageable with loans and a part-time job at the campus library. The first year was hard in the normal ways. New city, new rhythms, the disorienting feeling of being somewhere no one knew your name yet. But I studied more than I slept, and I asked every question I could think of, and by my second year I had found my footing. I called home every Sunday. My mother gave me updates on the neighbors. My father asked about my grades in the careful way he had, where he didn't want to seem like he was checking but clearly was. Dana had moved back to Clarksville by then. She'd done 2 years at community college and was working at the insurance agency in town, and when she got on the phone she talked mostly about people I barely remembered from high school. The trouble started the summer before my junior year. I was home for 2 weeks. It was late July, hot the way Tennessee gets when the air sits still and heavy on everything. Dana and I were in the kitchen one afternoon when she said, out of nowhere, that she'd applied to nursing school. She'd been looking into it for a while, she said. Thought it might be a good direction. I told her that was great, and I meant it. I asked which programs she was considering. She mentioned a few. I asked some follow-up questions about prerequisites, and she started to get quiet in that way. She had. The way that meant she'd heard something in my voice that wasn't there. I wasn't being critical. I was asking the same kind of questions I asked myself about everything. But Dana had always heard criticism and curiosity when it came from me. That evening at dinner, she mentioned to my parents that she was thinking about nursing. My mother was delighted. My father said he was proud. I said it was a solid choice and that the demand was strong. I thought I was being supportive. Dana looked at me once and then looked away. 2 weeks later, I drove back to Knoxville. The Sunday calls continued. A month into my junior year, I noticed something had shifted. My mother's voice was a little more careful. My father was a little shorter with me than usual. I asked if everything was okay. My mother said everything was fine. My father said the shop was busy. Then one Sunday my mother said, almost gently, "I heard you've been having some trouble in school." I remember the exact feeling of those words. Like the room had changed temperature without warning. "What trouble?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Dana mentioned you might be struggling. That the program is very competitive and maybe it's getting to be a lot." I sat with that for a second. I wasn't struggling. I had a 3.8 gigapascals. I'd just been accepted to a research position in the biology department. I told her that. She said, "Well," Dana seemed concerned. I said, "Dana's not in my program. Dana's not on my campus. Dana doesn't know anything about my coursework." My mother said she was sure Dana was just worried about me. I asked if I could talk to Dana. My mother said she wasn't home. I called Dana's cell and she didn't answer. I left a message. She didn't call back. The next time I spoke to my father, I tried to explain. I told him my grades were fine, that I was on track, that whatever Dana had said wasn't accurate. He listened and then he said, "She's your sister. She only wants what's best for you." And then he changed the subject. Over the next several months, the dynamic shifted in ways I couldn't fully see until later. My parents started asking fewer questions about school and more questions about whether I was taking care of myself, whether I was sleeping enough, whether I'd thought about what I would do if medicine didn't work out. Those questions had never been part of our conversations before. I came home for Christmas that year and the atmosphere was strange. Not cold exactly, but careful. Dana was warm to me in a performative way, the kind of warmth that's more about the room than the person. She asked how classes were going in a voice that suggested she already knew they weren't going well. I said they were going well. She tilted her head and said, "Good, I'm glad." And that was worse somehow than if she'd just said nothing. On the drive back to Knoxville after New Year's, I thought about calling home and explaining everything directly. But the problem with explaining yourself to people who've already decided something is that every explanation sounds like protest, and protest sounds like guilt. So I went back to school. I studied. I got into medical school on my first application cycle, which very few people do. I wrote to my parents with the news. My mother called and cried in a happy way and said she was so proud. My father got on the phone and said he always knew I could do it. Dana texted a single emoji. A thumbs up. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought my acceptance would close the chapter Dana had opened. It didn't. Medical school started in a different city. I moved to Nashville and found a small apartment near Vanderbilt, and began the process of becoming someone who could actually do the thing I had said I wanted to do since I was 17. The first year was the kind of hard that doesn't have good language for it. Not failure, just density. Every day felt like trying to absorb a month's worth of information and then prove you had absorbed it, over and over, while also sleeping and eating and remaining a functional person. I called home less that year. Not because I was avoiding it, but because there weren't enough hours, and the hours I had were mostly spent at the library or the anatomy lab or lying on my floor trying to remember what rest felt like. My mother understood. My father said to keep my head down and keep moving. Dana, I heard through occasional fragments, had started nursing school. She was doing well. She had also, I gathered, continued talking to my parents about me in ways that I was not present for. I found this out at Thanksgiving of my first year of medical school. I drove the 3 hours back to Clarksville and my mother hugged me at the door and held on longer than usual. At dinner, something was off in the way silences landed. Finally, near the end of the meal, my mother said quietly that Dana had told them I was thinking about dropping out. I put my fork down. "I'm not thinking about dropping out," I said. My mother said Dana had heard it from someone. A friend of a friend who had a cousin at Vanderbilt. I asked who. Nobody had a real answer. "I'm in medical school," I said. "I passed my first year boards. I'm not dropping out." My father looked at his plate. "We just want you, Jitlo, you can always come home," he said, "if it gets to be too much." That sentence landed like something heavy. Because what it meant was that they had already built a version of events in which coming home was the outcome they were preparing for. They had been given that version by my sister, and they had furnished it and moved into it. I tried to talk to Dana that weekend. I found her in the kitchen after dinner while our parents watched television in the other room. I asked her directly what she had told them. She looked surprised at first, then composed. "I'm just trying to look out for you," she said. "Medical school has a really high dropout rate. I was just saying it's okay if things don't work out." I told her things were working out. She shrugged in a small way that meant she didn't entirely believe me. I asked why she'd told them I was thinking about leaving. She said she'd heard it from someone. I said that person was wrong and I needed her to correct it with our parents. She said she didn't want to make a big thing of it. I drove back to Nashville that Sunday night with the windows down and the radio off. I thought about calling my parents again, explaining again. But I had already explained and it hadn't changed anything. There comes a point when you realize that the person controlling the narrative is not you, and that every correction you offer gets filtered through the story that's already been built. So I did what you do when the only thing you can actually control is yourself. I went back to work. I finished my second year. My third year began, which meant clinical rotations, actual patients, actual wards, the slow and terrifying process of learning how to be useful to sick people. I found that I was good at it. Not effortlessly, but genuinely. I was good at staying calm under pressure. I was good at listening to patients in a way that made them feel heard before they felt processed. My attending physicians said things to me that I wrote down not because I was supposed to, but because I needed to. My mother called less frequently. When we did talk, the conversations were shorter than they used to be. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She didn't ask for specifics. I understood that she had been given a frame for my life, and that my actual life didn't quite fit the frame, and that this made her uncomfortable in a way she didn't have words for. I stopped going home for most holidays. The drive felt longer than the miles. I sent cards. I sent small gifts at Christmas. I texted my mother on her birthday, and she texted back warmly but briefly. We were in a strange kind of suspension, the way families get when something unsaid sits between them for long enough that everyone pretends it isn't there. I graduated from medical school on a warm May morning. I walked across a stage in a gown and hood, and someone placed a diploma in my hands, and I thought about the anatomy textbook I used to check out from the Clarksville Public Library. My father drove up for the ceremony. My mother sat beside him. Dana did not come. She had, I was told, a conflict. My parents hugged me afterward and said they were proud, and I believe they meant it. But there was something underneath the pride that didn't quite match it. A kind of tentativeness, like they weren't entirely sure what they were celebrating. Residency came next. Surgery residency, which is its own separate kind of long. I matched at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I moved there with 2 suitcases and a box of textbooks, and began the part of training that makes the previous parts look gentle, 80-hour weeks. Middle of the night pages. Standing in operating rooms for 6 hours at a stretch, learning to do the thing with your hands that you have only read about for years. It is the kind of work that leaves very little room for anything else. I called home when I could. My mother asked once, gently, whether surgery was really the right track for me, whether internal medicine might be more manageable. I told her surgery was what I had always wanted and that I was doing well. She said, of course. Of course. She just wanted to make sure. I knew where that question had come from. By my 3rd year of residency, I had mostly stopped explaining myself. Not out of anger, but out of a kind of pragmatic conservation of energy. I loved my family. I believed my parents loved me. But a story had taken root in their understanding of my life, and I didn't have the time or the access to uproot it, and trying to do so cost more than I could spare. So I put my head down and I worked, and I let the years do what years do. I finished residency. I completed a fellowship. I was offered an attending position at a hospital in Charlotte, which I accepted. I was 29 years old, which is young for where I was, and I knew that, and I tried to hold it without arrogance. I sent my parents a letter when I got the position. I kept it simple. I told them I had finished my training and accepted a job as an attending surgeon. I gave them my new address. I told them I hoped they were well. My mother called. She cried. She said she had always believed in me. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that belief would have been easier to feel from a distance if it hadn't been so regularly undermined by my sister. I just said thank you, and that I missed them, and that I hoped we could see each other soon. My father got on the phone. His voice was thick. He said he was proud. I said I knew. Dana sent a text. "Congratulations, Dr. Calloway," with a period at the end, not an exclamation point. 2 years passed in the way that years pass when you are building something. I operated. I taught residents. I had a small apartment with too many houseplants and a cat named after a Supreme Court justice, and a friend group made mostly of other people who had also given their 20s to hospitals. I was not unhappy. I was something more specific than happy, which is purposeful. And then, in February of my second year as an attending, I got a call from my mother that changed everything. Dana's daughter, my niece Lily, who was 8 years old and whom I had met exactly 4 times, had been diagnosed with a condition requiring surgery. A specific kind of surgery. My mother was crying on the phone, trying to explain the diagnosis, reading from something she'd written down. And as I listened, I realized I knew exactly what she was describing. More than that, I realized I had done this surgery several times. In fact, at the conference being held the following month at the hospital in Charlotte where I worked, there was a pediatric session specifically about this procedure. Dana's daughter's surgeon had been invited to present, and that surgeon was in the department where I was now an attending physician. I sat with that information for a while after I got off the phone with my mother. Dana's daughter was going to need surgery at the hospital where I worked, in the department where I worked. At the conference where I had been asked to introduce the morning session, I did not call Dana. I thought about it and then I didn't. There was no particular cruelty in that decision. It was more that I didn't know what to say that would help, and I didn't want to make the situation about our history when a child was frightened and her parents were frightened. I made some quiet inquiries through proper channels. I made sure the care team was the best available. I did what I could do without inserting myself into a situation that wasn't asking for me. The conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March. I woke up before my alarm. Old habit from residency. I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom and put on my coat with the same kind of deliberateness I'd learned to apply to everything in the last 11 years. My badge. My name. My title. I thought briefly about my parents and then I set the thought aside and drove to the hospital. The auditorium was filling up when I arrived. I had notes to review before the session started. I walked in through the main doors from the back of the room, and I was looking down at my clipboard when I heard it. The sound my sister made when she saw me. I looked up. Dana was sitting 3 rows back with her husband, James, and their daughter Lily, who was there for the family orientation before her procedure. My parents sat 1 seat over. My mother had a tissue in her hand. For a moment, no one moved. I had not announced myself to my family. I had handled everything through the proper channels and kept my distance from the case itself out of professional ethics. I had not told my parents I worked at this hospital. I had told them I worked in Charlotte at a hospital. I had assumed they would eventually connect those facts. But in the way of families who have been keeping careful distance from one another, nobody had asked enough questions to draw the map. And now they were all looking at me in a hospital auditorium, and I was standing in a white coat that said everything before I had to. My niece Lily looked up at me with wide eyes. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I am." My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. My father stood up very slowly, the way men do when their legs aren't entirely reliable and their mind is trying to process something their body hasn't caught up to yet. I walked to the front of the room and did my job. I introduced the session. I thanked the presenting surgeons. I stood at the podium and spoke clearly and professionally, and I did not look at my family for most of it because I did not need to. The coat and the badge and the podium had already said what I had been trying to say for 11 years. During the break, my father found me in the hallway. He walked toward me slowly and stopped about 2 feet away and looked at my badge for a long time. Attending physician. Cardiothoracic surgery. He read it the way you read something you want to make sure you're reading correctly. He said my name. I said, "Hi, Dad." He opened his mouth and closed it and then opened it again. "How long?" he asked. 2 years here, I said. 11 years total. He exhaled through his nose in the way he had when he was trying to hold something together. Behind him, my mother was coming down the hallway with her hands folded together in front of her like she was approaching something fragile. She stopped in front of me and looked at my coat, and then at my face, and then back at my coat. She said, "You never stopped." "No, ma'am," I said. "I never stopped." Dana appeared at the edge of the hallway a few seconds later. James was with her and Lily was holding his hand. Dana had the expression of a person who has been carrying something for a long time and has just realized they've been carrying it in the wrong direction. For a moment, nobody spoke. The hallway had that specific hospital quiet, institutional, and removed from normal time. My mother turned toward Dana. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at her in a way that contained everything that needed to be said. Dana looked at the floor. I thought, she started. I didn't think it would. My mother said quietly, "What exactly did you think?" Dana was still looking at the floor. She looked the way people look when a story they've been telling themselves for years has just run out of road. "I was jealous," she said finally. "It came out small. Smaller than I expected. Mom and Dad were so proud of her and she hadn't even done it yet. I kept waiting for her to fail, and when she didn't, I kept saying she was about to." My father's jaw was very tight. "That's 11 years, Dana," he said. "I know," she said. My mother sat down on a bench along the wall. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time of day. She looked at me with something in her face that was not quite an apology and not quite a question, but something between them. "We should have asked more questions," she said. "We should have called the school ourselves." "Yes," I said gently. "You should have." My father looked at his hands for a moment, and then he looked at me. "I kept telling people my daughter was in medical school," he said, even after. His voice was rough. "I just stopped giving details when people asked how it was going." I felt something move in my chest at that, because I understood what he was saying. He had never fully believed Dana's version. He had just never been willing to actively disbelieve it. Pride works that way sometimes. It's easier to let something be vague than to ask the question that might prove you wrong. Lily tugged at James's hand and looked up at me again. "Are you going to be my doctor?" she asked. I crouched down to her level. "I'm going to make sure you have the very best doctor," I said. "I know everyone here very well. You're in good hands." She thought about that. "Okay," she said. And then she went back to swinging James's hand without any further concern, the way children handle enormous things by simply continuing to exist through them. Over the next 2 days, while Lily's procedure was scheduled and completed successfully, my family and I moved around each other in the careful way of people who have been reintroduced after a long separation. My mother brought coffee to the waiting room and asked me questions about my work. Real questions this time, not the careful managed kind. My father shook my hand at one point when we were standing in the hallway, the way he had when I signed my college acceptance letter, and he held on a beat longer than necessary. Dana and I did not have a long conversation. Not right away. She found me once on the second morning, before Lily's procedure, standing at the window at the end of the pediatric ward. The hallway was quiet. She came and stood beside me, and for a while neither of us said anything. "I wanted to be you," she finally said. "When we were growing up, I wanted what you had. The certainty of knowing exactly what you wanted." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just listened. She said, "I didn't mean for it to turn into what it became. It started as one conversation, and then I had to keep going to keep it consistent. And then it was just there." "I know how that works," I said. She looked at me. "I'm sorry," she said. And her voice was simple when she said it, stripped of performance. Just the words. I nodded. "I believe you," I said. She wiped her eyes once quickly. The hallway stayed quiet between us, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been before. Not a closed door, something more like a window that had been opened for the first time in a very long time. Lily's surgery went well. The surgeon who performed it was excellent, and I had made sure of that through every appropriate channel. When the attending came out to give the family the update, I stood a little apart from them, and I watched my mother hold my father's arm, and my father put his hand over hers, and for a moment they looked like the people I remembered from before any of this happened. After Lily was settled and the family had eaten and the adrenaline had started to come down, my mother found me in the break room where I was finishing a chart. She sat across from me without asking if it was a good time. She said, "We missed everything, didn't we?" I set my pen down. "Not everything," I said. "You're here now." She was quiet for a moment. "We should have called," she said. "The school, the hospital, anyone. We should have looked." "Yes," I said again. But I said it softly. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine the way she used to when I was small and the world was confusing. "I'm so proud of you," she said. Not the careful kind of proud where someone isn't sure they've earned the right to say it. The direct kind. The kind that doesn't leave room for a qualifier. I squeezed her hand. "I know, Mom," I said. "I know you are." That evening my father walked me to my car in the hospital parking lot. The air was cool and the lot was mostly empty. We stood there for a moment with our hands in our pockets, the way we used to stand on the porch back in Clarksville when there was something important but neither of us had quite organized it into words yet. He said, I have every letter you ever sent. I looked at him. Your mother wanted to throw them out, he said. After. I wouldn't let her. I kept them in the bottom of the filing cabinet in the shop. He cleared his throat once. I don't know what I thought I was keeping them for. Maybe I knew something didn't add up. Maybe I just couldn't let go of who you were. I stood with that for a moment. Then I said, "You could have just called me." "I know," he said. He looked at the parking lot. "I didn't want to find out I'd made the wrong call." He paused. "That's not a good reason." "No," I said. "It isn't." He looked at me then, directly. "But I'm here now, if you'll have us." I thought about that. About the 11 years. About the text with the period. About the anatomy textbook I used to copy by hand into a spiral notebook on the back porch of a house in Clarksville, while my father worked on engines down the road and had no idea his younger daughter was going to turn out to be someone who operated on hearts. I thought about all of it. And then I said, "I'll have you." 6 months later, my parents came to Charlotte for the weekend. My father helped me build a bookshelf I'd bought in pieces and had no patience for. My mother made the same 3-layer cake she used to make at Christmas, and we ate it at my kitchen table with the cat sitting on the chair beside us like a disapproving dinner guest. We talked about things that mattered and things that didn't, and the talking felt like the talking of people who are still figuring out how to be in each other's lives again, which is exactly what it was. Dana and I were slower. We texted sometimes. Short exchanges, careful ones. But something had shifted. She was quieter around me now. Not in the withdrawn way she used to be, but in the way of a person who is listening more carefully than they used to. I thought that might be enough for a while. Lily sent me a drawing she made at school. In it there was a person in a white coat standing next to a building that I think was meant to be the hospital. The person had yellow hair even though mine is brown, and the building was floating slightly off the ground, as 8-year-olds' buildings often do. At the bottom in careful capital letters, she had written, "My aunt the doctor." I put it on my refrigerator. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry about those 11 years. The ones between the kitchen table in Clarksville where I said I wanted to be a surgeon, and the hallway in Charlotte where my parents finally read my badge. The honest answer is that I am not. Anger requires a kind of ongoing maintenance that I never had the bandwidth for. What I have instead is a very clear understanding of something that took me most of a decade to learn. Families don't always fail each other out of cruelty. They fail each other out of assumptions. They hear one person's version and they furnish it like a room and they move into it, and they stop asking questions because asking questions means accepting that they might have been wrong and nobody likes the sound of that particular door opening. If my mother had called the school once, she would have found out I was on the dean's list. If my father had asked anyone from the college to confirm what Dana was saying, the answer would have ended it in a month instead of a decade. If Dana had found some other way to manage her jealousy, if she had talked to anyone, if she had let me be what I was becoming without turning it into a threat, we would have had 11 more years together, all of us. 11 years of holidays and phone calls and being a family the way families are supposed to be. But we do not get the years back. What we get is what comes after. And what comes after, if people are willing, is the chance to be better to each other than they were before. To ask the extra question. To make the call. To not build a room out of someone else's version of your person. I stood in that hospital auditorium in a white coat I had spent 11 years earning, and I did not have to say a single word about who I was. The coat said it, the badge said it. 11 years of refusing to quit said it. If this story found its way to you, I hope it means something simple. Don't let someone else tell the story of the people you love. Ask for yourself. Listen for yourself. Because the door you think closed might only be as locked as the questions you were too proud to ask.